Hello there, this is Yana Smakula for W+9, and thank you for joining me today. During the month of April, I shared several projects using background stamps. I titled my posts Background Study as I really wanted to explore and test out different background options I could create using W+9 stamps and inks for my projects. You're seeing all of these cards on the screen right now. I used two different stamp sets, Borders and Backgrounds 1 and Borders and Backgrounds 4. I made two sets of cards using different color combinations, some very bold and colorful, and the other set was more soft and feminine. Today I decided to continue exploring backgrounds and decided to create several additional card ideas featuring heat embossing. I only used inks for my original cards and did a lot of ombre stamping. This time I decided to do heat embossing and do ombre ink blending for a similar yet different look. I'm going to heat emboss several backgrounds using gold and white embossing powders. I've already done my gold backgrounds and I used antique gold embossing powder from Simon Says Stamp. You can use regular gold or also experiment with other colors such as platinum, brass, silver, or you can even do clear. To create my backgrounds, I'm using a clear block with grid lines. You can also use a stamp positioner, but using a clear block with etched lines makes the stamping go a bit faster. Grid lines help a great deal when aligning images and making sure each row is perfectly straight. I am mounting my image onto the block, making sure the bottom of my design is exactly next to one of the grid lines. I have picked a very light pink color for this card and I'm going to do my stamping. I will be adding ink blending, and to make it easier on my wrist and also to save time, I picked the color of cardstock that best matches the lightest color of ink I plan to use for my ink blending. You can also use white paper for this, so do white heat embossing on white, and then use 2 or 3 colors of ink to create that ombre ink blending. But when you have colored cardstock as your base, you need to do significantly less work, as you already have that base color right there on your paper. I've treated my paper with an anti-static powder tool and have inked up my image using clear sticky ink. I aligned it on my paper and made the first impression. The ink that I'm using today is a watermark ink, meaning even though it is clear, it leaves a shade darker impression on my paper. That impression best shows up on dark colors of cardstock, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But because this paper is so pale, I can hardly see the impression. So I need to add embossing powder to help me see where I need to stamp the second and third row of my designs. Once I have all of my images stamped, and I only added 3 rows as I wanted the top of this paper to be free from heat embossing, I'm going to grab my heat tool and heat set this powder. Let's create another background. This time I'm using a dark blue cardstock panel and stamping a smaller dotted background using clear ink. Because this paper is darker, it's easier to see my stamping, and therefore I do not need to add embossing powder after every impression. I can stamp the entire background and then come in and cover the background with white embossing powder. And once again, I'm using my heat tool and going to heat set this. So here are 2 of my backgrounds side by side. I just love this dotted chevron design. I find it to be very modern and versatile. I'm also going to stamp another piece. This time I'm using a dotted pattern and repeating all of the steps to create heat embossed piece for my card. Now let's go ahead and add some color to our backgrounds. I'm using Sweet Gelato ink color and a mini round ink blending tool and going to heavily blend this color. I'm adding a lot more color at the bottom and lightening it up when I get to the top to create a seamless blend into that light pink. You can see how little time it took me to actually add color. Since my background was already light pink, I didn't have to do as much ink blending, and I also did not need to use several colors of ink. Here's this background next to an identical one, heat embossed in gold. You might notice that the white heat embossing turned slightly pink. Now there's a way to fix that. You can spray a tiny amount of stamp cleaner onto a paper towel and lightly wipe your heat embossing to remove the ink. I used Hero Art's Ultra Clean Stamp Cleaner for this. If you're using a different cleaner, do test it before using it on your actual project. I added ink blending in the same manner to my light blue background and to my dark blue background, and used the same tip to clean my heat embossing. I trimmed my backgrounds down and foam mounted onto 4-bar note cards. I simply adore this card size lately, so I wanted to make a few more smaller projects to have on hand. To embellish these cards, I'm going to use more fresh cut stamp set. I'm going to stamp Happy Birthday sentiment in black ink onto strips of a white cardstock, and I'm also going to die cut and stamp several leaves and flowers to complete my projects. I used the same ink color I used for my ink blending, and I also picked Last Leaf and Apple Teeny colors to stamp the leaves. I didn't do anything special for these cards, as I did not want to take the attention away from the backgrounds. I foam mounted sentiment strips onto my cards, and foam mounted flowers and leaves next to the sentiments. I used my fingers and shaped the leaves a little bit to make them look a bit more dimensional. One last thing I did, I used a black pigment pen, white and black Nuvo drops, and added details to my cards. I used gloss white dots to add white dimensional centers to my flowers, and also used same product to add details to my backgrounds. That not only added a little bit of interest, but also helped create depth on these projects. This card ended up being my absolute favorite. I used Nuvo drops in black and added a medium-sized dot onto every white heat embossed circle. On this card, I added small black dots in between gold heat embossed design. On this project, I used a black pigment pen and added tiny black dots inside the gold heat embossed design. The two other white heat embossed cards I left as is and only added white details to the flower centers. So this finishes my today's video. I hope I have given you some ideas to try and explore. Have fun, play a little bit, and enjoy. Thank you so much for joining me today. Be sure to check out W+9 for more creative inspiration. I will see you next time. Bye!